Perfect. And so we're on that platform.
We're officially recording. We're live. And she also has a podcast called Diversity Connects Us. So I'll leave the link for you as well in the chat so you can check that out. And we're just really excited to dive in. So Rachelle, thank you so much for being here, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Sam, you wanted to.
Yeah, so Rachelle, I would just love to hear a little bit more about you. So if we could dive into your background, I mean, how did you get to where you are today and helping leaders, know more about emotional intelligence, EQ, and how to lead their teams better?
Right. That's a great question. I think how I got into it was by working within different organizations and different school boards as well in the public and private sector and not-for-profit industry. I realized that there was a very high turnover, and people were quiet leaving, they were quiet leaving, and it seemed over the years as I was compiling information that a lot of workplaces were toxic. And in those workplaces being toxic, people were psychologically affected by it and not outputting and not giving their best. So I realized that, and I was, guilty of doing that as well, not because I didn't want to work, but because it wasn't a psychologically safe environment anymore, but not being able to put a word to it. So over the years, with research and, educational degrees that I've amassed over the years, I realized that what it really comes down to is emotional intelligence and how we're able to communicate with others on a people level, hence, People Strategy Forum. It's how are we relating from our heart to your heart? How are we welcoming you? What languages are we using? It's not really about the celebration of, X month and what happens in December and what happens in February. It's really how do we globalize our language to be able to allow people to feel more included? And that really comes within us.
That's so important. I mean, I think that there's been just a huge movement towards humanizing the workforce in the past, well, especially since the past few years. I mean, we've really focused on how important it is to be teaming and collaborating with our people more on a peer-to-peer basis instead of this command and control of the old days. And I think that is starting to bring more awareness of greater inclusion, and more emotional intelligence is definitely needed for leaders to be able to navigate this space, because things are quickly changing, right? I mean, we moved into a fully remote workplace a couple of years ago, and now we're in the hybrid area, and things are still struggling back and forth. So what have your leaders been struggling with in the current time frame?
That's a good question. I believe a lot of my clients were struggling with remaining in a fixed mindset. And, when I say a fixed mindset is really having a limited belief of how they view themselves and then transferring it on to others unknowingly. And, a clear example would be, we all have a home life before we come to work or enter our little, workspaces here. And whatever happens at home is usually transferred into our workplace. So I think one of the things that I've heard many times was, not understanding why people have a certain body language when they come into work, or why people, are slunched over, or there's just so many things that you can read in the body language where it's apparent that something happened, but it's not being addressed in the workplace because they tend to see work as work. But work, it's very hard to be able to fulfill your work tasks if you're not feeling included, or someone's not asking, how was your morning? As opposed to, how are you? I'm fine. whereas, the open-ended questions, which is what I was saying earlier, is really important. How are you feeling? You don't look really good. And how is everything? That already opens up a really human-centric, it removes the barriers, and people are able to connect a little bit more. And once they feel connected, then they can work and, achieve better and greater results. That's what the clients have mentioned to me. That's really helpful.
Yeah, so I don't know what you think, Smith, but I often find that leaders are often ill prepared to really be aware in their surroundings, because they have a lot of different pressures and responsibilities. What are your thoughts there?
Interesting question, Sam. And I've got a slightly conflicting opinion about this. So I can't really remember where I watched this. It was I think it was a Netflix show where this person is a cult leader, and they're talking about emotional intelligence and the fact that a high EQ enables them to draw people into their cult and kind of create an ongoing set of folks who are out acting as serial killers. So after reading a little bit on EQ, I mean, I kind of started believing that it's almost like it's a tool. It's not an end in itself. So building emotional intelligence or building emotional quotient does not mean you'll get the right results in an organization. It probably just means that you've got a tool. It's kind of like nuclear fission. You can use it to generate electricity. You can also use it to destroy nations. So I'd be very keen to understand what Rachelle thinks of this.
I love that. I love that question. I think also when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's understanding that your actions impact others, and it's a way to build a stronger relationship with your staff, to create a culture of trust, respect, collaboration within the team. So when we think of an emotionally intelligent team, it's one that understands that working together can improve outcomes while helping reduce the stress, benefiting everyone that's involved, and recognizing that the importance of the skill is able to transfer itself for a more positive work environment so that everyone can reach their maximum potential.
So what can leaders do, Rachelle, to ensure that, one, that they can create teams that are aware and use emotional intelligence in a people-centric way, in a positive way with their teams, to ensure that we're avoiding some of the negative behaviors that Smith was highlighting?
Right. Well, there are a few things that you can do to build an EQ-centered workplace culture. It's to encourage open and honest communication, and also to be able to train employees in emotional intelligence and setting the tone for this. And I think as leaders, what's really important is that we take the time to invest in it, ask for feedback, right? Because I think a lot of times we don't know how the team is functioning or how they're working or how they feel. So anonymous feedbacks, I believe, is something that's very important. Surveys, so that you can actually gauge and sense the pulse of the team, because that's when you really know what's really going on. And especially the fact that it's anonymous, I think it's the best way to be able to see what's working and what's not working. Who best to ask is really from the team, because I understand as being leaders, yes, and I would agree with Sumit, there's a lot of things. That's just one of the things in the tool, in our toolbox, but I believe it's really the big picture, because it's the employees that make the company and that are able to reach those potential outcomes, positive or negative, depending on how they feel or how they are being felt in the organization.
So when
Great,
you
that's inside.
go ahead,
Sorry,
Smith.
Sam. So I had another question on emotional intelligence, which was we talk about intelligence, or we talk about IQ, and there are various schools of thought. One which says it's more genetic and stuff that you're born with, and you can train yourself to be, let's say, visually intelligent or spatially intelligent or intelligent in various ways to a certain extent. When we talk about building EQ, is that something similar? Is it stuff you're born with? Is it like a muscle that you can train, or how do you find the sweet spot of how emotionally intelligent you need to be for a certain role?
I love that question. And I have to be honest, on a personal level, I think it's a muscle that needs to be built, but you need somebody else to help you build it if you don't recognize that there's a problem. So if there's no recognition that there is something that we need to work on, then we're not going to work on it. So I believe throughout the years, as I've been helping leaders, they were aware something was off, but they didn't know what it was. So I think once we understand the concepts, and we were talking, I believe, about it before you came on the panel, it was, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship management, and self-control, being able to control the way in which we view certain things to be able to have better positive, impactful situations with teams. So do I believe, is it something that you're born with? When I read Daniel Goleman's, articles, it's a muscle. He's the one who founded, all this, all the research surrounding EQ, and it's a muscle that can be built, and it's a skill that can be learned and taught.
That makes a lot of sense, in fact. And I mean, what you were saying about training the muscle and having somebody else comment on what you need to do, it again makes a lot further sense, because it's almost like if I have a goal of wanting to get fit, it's not really up to me in which direction to proceed. I would probably need an instructor or a coach who says, no, you don't really need as much of cardio, you need more of weights, and finding the right balance. So I think that really, really explains it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so, Rachelle, when teams are providing that feedback and a problem is identified, let's say that there's a particular individual that is causing some instability in the team, that is causing the team to question the psychological safety of the group. What action should be taken there by leaders?
You were cutting off. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
So when you're getting feedback from a team, and then there's a problem with psychological safety, what action should leaders take to remedy the problem?
That's a really good question. I think also what one of the things that's really important is to, once you've gathered that data and you're able to understand what the data shows, is really to identify what it is as a team that, we all, or the workspace, could do to make it better. Because sometimes it could really be a simple conversation with that one person, and then to find out that that person is the sole breadwinner in the household, taking care of 3 or 4 other people in the household, pickups and drop-offs. Then there's just so much that comes into play with that one person, and the heaviness that they bring into the workplace will affect others. But having that communication and understanding, okay, this is what's going on. So maybe we can reduce your hours, or maybe you can not take lunch and then you can leave at 2 so that you can tend to, because we're whole people. You know, we're not just a part of a person coming into work. So all those things encompass and affect the way we're going to show up at work. So if that one person has all that responsibility, then it makes it very difficult to show up authentically in your workspace. So I think there's, especially now being hybrid and remote, it makes it very easy now to be able to attend to all our responsibilities, right? Given the fact that the leader now understands this is what's, preventing the person from reaching their maximum potential, but to help them reach a broader potential, I know in some countries they do, in some countries they don't, but some people have a 4-day work week. And statistics have proven that people who have a 4-day work week are more productive because now they know they're going to get Friday off. So they'll do the extra 4 or 5 hours on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, maybe not take a lunch or however, the guidelines at the workspace work, to be able to have the Friday, and then you come back on Monday really feeling refreshed. So it really depends on how much the leader really wants to work with keeping their team in that safe space. But that safe space really means what's going on outside of the workplace.
That's definitely a good point. The one thing that I was trying to get at, though, is like if we find that there's a leader identifies that a certain member on a team is causing the team to be destabilized, and so what are the steps that a leader should take to put together a remediation plan to help that team reestablish that trust and psychological safety? What are the steps that are required, and how much time does that typically take to go through that?
That's a good question. And I think the time that it takes, so the steps, it's really having that already in place. It's, starting with yourself. If you want to promote emotional intelligence in the workplace, it really starts with you. So to build, again, like Sumit was saying, we build that emotional awareness muscle to be able to put those skills into practice. It sounds very abstract. So when I say a skill, I'm going to put it very, very simply, right? As a parent. So it's the simplest form. So my daughter, I was already in a not sour mood, and I have to go pick her up every day at 3:00. And my mood came into the car, and then I went to pick her up at the school, and I'm waiting now in the carpool, and I'm losing my patience. And I'm like, oh, this carpool is so slow. And right then and there, I'm realizing, wait a minute, Rachelle, you're coming to pick up Sophia. She's going to be in a good mood. I need to tell myself that I am having this sour mood, accept the thought, not analyze it, go through it and say, it will be okay. And then she comes bursting into the car, all happy. And how was your day? And then now she tells me how awful her day was and what happened with the teacher. So now I have to de-escalate where I was, right? So my sour mood now, I have to park it to be able, so that comes with self-awareness. So I'm parking that sour mood to be able to address her mood, because if I brought the sour mood to her, then that would have affected her. But mommy, I was only trying to tell you that, this is what happened and somebody XYZ. The whole dynamics of her and her relationship would have been completely different if I would have parked my mood and then now been able to address her mood. And then now this is when we're more connected. So the next day, now she's built the trust with me and said, okay, mommy was receptive to what I said. She understood what I said. She helped me manage, because now I'm now I've, controlled my mood, and now I'm helping her manage her own. So now she's processed it, she's understood it, and it brings a sense of respect, because I didn't say, well, I had a bad mood today. She didn't need to hear that, right? So now she's safe, she feels safe. I didn't bring my toxicity into the relationship with her. And next day, everything will be better, because now she's been able to trust the fact that I was physically and emotionally present for her at that moment. I don't know if that simplifies it a little bit more.
So a lot of it has to really do with, increasing your listening skills and empathy, right? Is that?
Which is emotional intelligence. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. It's active listening, reflective listening, and empathy. That's exactly what it is. And and there's moments where I love that you simplified it. That's exactly what it is, Howard. And I think also what happens is we lose that because we're so focused on, let's say I go back to my sour mood, so focused onto me, that I haven't been able to understand and to bridge the gap, because we're bridging the gaps.
Right.
To bridge the gap, to be able to bring that closeness with her and I, and to be able to understand her on a different level. And that's the same in a workplace. It's the same in a workplace.
So are there exercises that you would take people through to help them better understand active listening?
And it's pausing. I think we're in a culture where we always need to have the answers, right? And we don't need to always have the answers. I think what's really important, and I'm going to do an EQ series with another colleague of mine. She's a neuro coach. She's a neuroscience coach. It's having the ability, like you said, active listening, just to stay quiet. And when you're staying quiet, it's non-judgmental. It's not waiting for the next question to ask, just really being present with your body and your thoughts to be able to absorb everything the other person is saying. I love that, Howard. You brought in such a good point.
Well, I'd like to go back to that moment you were talking about when you were saying that you were sitting in the car, you were in the sour mood and you were getting ready to pick up your daughter. So there was something happened there. You became self-aware that you were in this mood, and you realized that you needed to change it before you caused something that was disruptive. So how do we as leaders understand, that there is we need to take a break and identify that mood? Because when we're in that sour mood, we're often hyper focused on that one thing. So how do we take a break and understand and be able to be aware?
I love that question. There are multiple things that we do, that we can do to be able to calm the mind. And I think it's, I read another book on the power of now, and he was saying in the power of now that it's, to be in the moment. I think oftentimes we are dwelling in the past, or we're dwelling in the future for something that's never happened yet. And for myself, when I was in the car, to center and to refocus on what was going on, I literally had to, I started to start breathing, because when you breathe, intentionally breathe, it calms the nervous system. It calms the nervous system, and then you can refocus on the moment. Because my moment was 2 hours ago, but I'm still carrying that moment 2 hours later, once I get in the car and I'm rattled and frazzled. And then, so it's, the exercises come with breathing. I discovered meditation while driving, where you're focusing on the road, you're focusing on the tree, you know, you're focusing on the clouds. It sounds so, it doesn't, you know, for a lot of people who are not, who are still skeptic, it fundamentally calms down different parts of the brain to be able to think rationally again, because exactly what you said, Sam, there's that part in our brain that's constantly looking to fix something, a situation, to find something to fix. And, you know, we're constantly analyzing and dissecting and reanalyzing and then talking about the analysis that we made, and it keeps us stuck. Right? So I think what happens when that comes is to realize, okay, Rachelle, I need to breathe, you know, or, you know, become aware of your surroundings to reframe your mindset. I think that's the big challenge, is really reframing your mindset.
Well, we're in another situation now when we are managers also need to be aware of the different styles, the different cultures, the different backgrounds of their people. So how can emotional intelligence help us with the important topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, for instance?
So what happens when we are more attuned with ourselves? Let's talk about unconscious biases, for instance, because that's part of DEI. So when we talk about unconscious biases, they start from a very, very young age. And when it starts, I believe, yes, have to be able to let it go. Exactly. So I believe, and it's a process, because it starts with knowing, understanding the process, knowing that the process comes from within, and being able to identify and accept certain things that some of us might not want to accept when it comes to unconscious biases. So in unconscious biases, I believe that person is green. And I believe that person was green since I was 2, because I heard when that person came through the door, the person was green. So now I grow up, I go into my workplace, and now I see green people. And the green people, right? The green little people, the green little monsters are a certain way, and I carry that through. If I say, I understand this is the person, it's really retraining the brain and refocusing on how to no longer make it a bias. So once you've affirmed that, yes, Rachelle, you have an unconscious bias towards a green person, but the green person has also been able to come through the door and be able to do XYZ to achieve XYZ. And now you're no longer seeing the person as green. You're seeing the person as a whole person that's being able to come in and do it, right? You're shaking your head, Jules. Everyone's shaking their head. And you're no longer focusing on the green person and the negative connotation that's attached to the green person. You focus now on the person bringing their whole selves in and to be able to give 100% of their work. And now being green is no longer a problem. So I think once that's addressed and we've been able to assess our own biases and our own blinders, because it happens, because as we get older, we start building a story or a narrative that fits the green person. Once we start building those narratives, then we justify that narrative with the story with the green person. So it's very nuanced. And I think once we've been able to understand that this is something that's normal, and it's not a judgment against somebody else, and that we can understand it, then we can definitely help somebody else possibly remove the blinders by using more neutral language. You know, I always say in hiring processes, we need to hire not based on someone's name. And I know in a lot of hiring processes, we hire based on someone's name, or we hire based on the mirror image of what we look like. So and it's unconscious. It's not a conscious thing. It's really unconscious. And it's a place where we can deconstruct those biases to be able to now, again, I always say neutral language, to use neutral language, a more inclusive language, to be able to set the pace and the tone for the culture and the workspace.
What do you think, Samantha?
So on the note of inclusion, I was just thinking it can be difficult to integrate different cultures into it and to get over your conscious and unconscious biases. I don't know if it's an apt example, but like last week I was traveling to the US from India. So it would be fairly common for one to step into, say, a coffee shop and the person to greet you saying, "Hey, how's your day going today?" And it's not really a cultural norm here where you walk into a coffee shop, you order, sit down, have your coffee and leave. So there's no, I mean, I'm sure if a person from the US were to come here, they would probably think people are being rude and not really emotionally intelligent or, I mean, aware of what they really need, and vice versa. So how does one, I mean, it's a slightly frivolous example, I know, but I think situations like this could arise in the workplace as well. So how do we account for those cultural differences and help navigate through them?
That's a really good question. When it comes to cultural differences, and again, it comes back to the communication. When leaders are communicating and, you know, in meetings and having, you know, conversations with the staff, it's really crucial to use a language. I think it all comes down to the language, to be able to use a language of inclusivity, to be able to allow people to show up as themselves. It's really subtle. So if I'm walking into a boardroom and I only address the green people and I don't address, you know, the yellow people, then I've already come in and set the tone. I've already given the green people the green light, and I haven't given the yellow people to come in to be their authentic self because my energy is already directed to the green people. And I've already excluded my yellow people. And once I've excluded them, they no longer feel safe because I've already depicted with my energy and my language that I'm only addressing the green people. Do you see the subtlety? And once we feel comfortable, then we can bring our whole selves in. But until then, there's always a discomfort because, you know, it goes back to the open-ended questions. And I'll give myself as an example. I've had a best friend for more than 25 years, and she's Muslim. But throughout the 25 years, I would ask questions. What do you do for Ramadan? You know, what do you eat? When do you celebrate? You know, how many times a day do you pray? You know, I had to learn how to be sensitive to her culture. I have a very best friend who's Jewish, and what's Pesach? What do you do during Pesach? What do you do, you know, during Rosh Hashanah? You know, what is it that you celebrate? Do you need days off for those days? I know Pesach, you know, I know a lot of people don't work during that time. It's those little things that we can ask to show it's not concern, it's to show that we care and that we want to know. And again, you know, myself being, you know, Haitian, it's not that I want to educate them, but it's what can I find out from them to know a little bit more, so that could be a little bit more sensitive to their needs, and then have that transpires a whole workplace once you've bridged that gap. And I think that's where we need to come together as a nation globally, so that we, you know, don't get tied into the misinformation that's being given to us, you know, that's being fed to us by media. I think it's really important to not see the visual differences, but to know where we are alike, you know, because everybody has a tradition, we all have a different cultures, we eat different foods. You know, some people go to synagogue, some people go to church, some people go to temple, some people go to a mosque. It's how can I as a leader, and all of it has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. How as a leader can I bridge that gap, asking you know, few questions. It doesn't take much. It's not, hi, how are you? I'm fine. You know, what are you celebrating this month? I know you're fasting. My neighbor across the street, they're from Pakistan, and they would fast. They were eating, and it's only because I asked that I knew, because he was, you know, he'd come in and, you know, he'd clean his driveway, but he was a little, you know, slower. And so I'd ask, you know, what's going on? He said, oh, I'm celebrating Ramadan. I said, oh, when do you eat? He said, I eat at 5 when it's dark. I don't eat for the day. And then all of us, you know, we have this big festive meal in the evening, and we do that. And then he explained it. And I was, okay, I understand that. And now it makes me understand his culture a different way, because I was not afraid to ask the question to be able to bridge the gap, so I wouldn't make those unconscious bias thoughts and ideas. Do you see?
Agreed, and that makes perfect sense. But I mean, I'm assuming it would be much easier to have these discussions with people who are culturally different when you have the psychological safety of being a friend, or when you already know them and have a certain comfort level. So in an organization, how does one create the right kind of infrastructure where a question is not really asked in an offensive way or taken to be offensive? Like, if completely out of context, I were to ask somebody about their religious practices, or in case they're from the LGBTQ community, I ask them about gender identity or sexual identity. It could potentially be an offensive question as well, and it could also be a total lack of research on my part. So how does one find that kind of balance, or how does one create the infrastructure where it's fine to be curious and fine to be asking questions, to be, I mean, coming from a place of good faith, trying to be more inclusive?
Right. Again, I love to go back to the feedback and assessments, the anonymous feedbacks and assessments. Once we have, you know, feedback from the team to be able to assess what it is that the team is weak on, or what the team has strengths in, it's better able to shape a guideline. You know, if we have guidelines that are in place, and that's one of the steps, if we have a guideline that establishes, you know, cultural sensitivity and identity, and all that is in the guidelines and it's practiced on a daily basis, then it definitely helps push the DEI needle forward, and it's able to allow people to have that space, because now it's part of the guideline, it's part of the infrastructure, it's being practiced and assessed and reassessed, because that's something that you continually have to do, is check the pulse of the staff in surveys and feedbacks to see how it is that they're feeling in terms of their workspace. So there's an emotional wellness quiz that I do for teams. And the emotional wellness quiz really lays it out. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it lays out questions that everybody answers on their own. And then there's a scale from 1 to 5, and then it tabulates your results, and then it says, in those results, we recognized that you've been in a certain mood, let's say angry mood, or positive, or negative, or depressed. Once that has been established, because that is something that I usually come in with, is right off the bat, is doing the emotional well. Once that has been established, then I can understand and know how to process and how to proceed further to be able to deconstruct. And it's not to change, because it doesn't change someone, it just modifies and tweaks a little bit of their thoughts and behaviors to be able to have a better work-life experience.
Fascinating. So thank you so much, Rachelle, for sharing that knowledge. I want to take a quick break here, since we're coming up towards the top of the hour, and just share our next week's speaker on the People Strategy Forum. So we do have, I'm very pleased to announce that we have Donald Knight. Donald Knight will be joining us. He is the Chief People Officer of Greenhouse Software, and a brilliant leader. And so I'm very excited about hearing him talk about the power of empathy and building a people-first culture. It's my mission, I guess you could say, is to help companies develop this people-first culture. It's so important for us to be successful in the future in getting the right talent for us to work in our companies that are aligned with our values and culture. So Donald's going to show us how he has accomplished that at Greenhouse Software, and I'm pleased to have him on the forum. Great. Well, back to you, Rachelle. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the programs you have coming up, and how people can learn more about emotional intelligence and leadership, and how to harness that skill in their practice.
You were cutting off a little bit. I didn't hear the.
Sure. So can you tell me a little bit more about how people can reach out and contact you and learn more about emotional intelligence and building that up in their practice?
Sure. I've written 2 books: Emotional Intelligence, a Toolkit for Managing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. That's also on Amazon. And then Know Yourself, to know your employees. And then to reach out to me, I have a newsletter on LinkedIn called Raise Your EQ. And it's phenomenal little blogs that people can use to reflect. Howard at the beginning said it's good to have empathy. And I think what's important is to have empathy towards ourselves, to address our blind spots, have empathy towards ourselves, right? To be able to push the needle forward. So definitely subscribing to that newsletter will help. Will help. And then the coaching is also something that we work on. We do group coaching and we do one-on-one coaching as well. So everyone can find me on LinkedIn or Diversity Connects Us, which is the podcast. And Donald is amazing. He was on my podcast. You'll love his energy. He's people-centric and heart-centric, and mention ice cream. Just mention ice cream to him.
Oh, I'm already in.
Mention ice cream.
Ice cream. That's all it took.
That's all it took. You're already in. So, and tell him who told you about the ice cream. Tell him, how about the ice cream, Donald? What do you do with ice cream? And then he'll tell you, he'll dissect it for you.
Love it. And
That's
just
great.
so everyone knows, I've put all the links here in the chat. So for the Rachel EQ newsletter, the podcast link, and the book links as well. And the books, you know, give them some love. If you buy the books, leave some nice reviews, some love for Rachelle, because you know she's been giving us a lot. So we definitely want to try to give something a little back to her as well. So check out those 2 books, and the podcast and the newsletter, and you know, get in touch with her for her services and coaching as well. So it's all there.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Rachelle, for sharing your wisdom today with us.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me on this panel today.
Thank you.
All right. Well, take care, and we'll see everyone else next week on the People Strategy Forum. Thank you very much.
Have a good day, everyone.
Oh,
Bye.
Thank you, Rachelle. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.